My name is Chuck Dunaway. I currently live in Houston, Texas. I'm retired, and I was born in Oklahoma and in 1934. I was raised in Oklahoma in Forerman, Okmulgee, and Stigler till I was about a sophomore in high school. Then I moved to Dallas, Texas, spent a couple of years there. Then my senior year in high school was spent in Houston at Stephen F. Austin High School. While there, I met a disc jockey, Paul Berlin, who inspired me to become a radio disc jockey myself. I used to take him cigars and he would let me sit in the studio and watch him work. I saw how the girls enjoyed or liked being around him, so I said, that's the kind of job I want. So I decided to become a disc jockey, and I went to every small town I could find in the state of Texas to apply for a job. Was finally hired at Big Spring, KBST, for 65 cents an hour. I stayed in a $7 a week bed and breakfast, would walk to work, and would scramble as hard as I could to make enough hours to get enough money to be able to have a couple of dollars left over to enjoy a movie or something. While there, I was called by a couple of other stations I had auditioned for. Took a job on the coast of Texas, got me closer to Houston. After about a year and a half in the business, I was working in Houston. And the great thing was I was working eventually at KNUZ, doing the show 2 hours before and 2 hours after my boyhood idol, Paul Berlin. While at KNUZ, I met Leland Rogers, whose brother's Kenny Rogers, and Leland was a record promotion man. He worked the Oklahoma City market and told the people in Oklahoma City, Danny Williams and Lee Allen Smith, that they should look at hiring me from Houston and bringing me to Oklahoma City. They flew me to Oklahoma City. I bought a silk suit to make the trip and try to make an impression. Danny Williams later told me it was the most beautiful suit he ever saw, and I looked like a star getting off that plane. I guess that got me the job because that night, I was a non-drinker. I drank too much and made a complete fool of myself in front of Danny and Lee Allen. Next day, I assumed the job offer was off the table. I went down to the WKY studios, and Danny says, "We want to hire you." I was surprised. They made me an offer, and it wasn't quite enough money. So they said, "We'll do this for you. We'll get you, you can produce the radio University of Oklahoma University football games, and we'll pay you so much per show." So that'll get you some extra money. Then we'll see if we can get you on television, and that'll pay you so much per show. And also remember that you can do hops here. We don't charge for airtime, and all the money you can make on a hop is yours. I noticed that Don Wallace was driving a Cadillac. A couple of the other jocks were driving pretty big cars, so I assumed that hop business must be pretty good. So I took the job, came to Oklahoma City, and went to work on the Forerman Scotty show. I was Hog Waller on Forerman Scotty, and I found out really quickly that Hog Waller was a good character, but the character I started out with was not so good. I became a hippie, speaking jive talk, wearing a beret and beating on a bongo drum, and the kids didn't like that character at all. So Forerman Scotty said, "Who are you and where are you from?" I said, "Well, I'm really Hog Waller." I put on a baseball hat, turned it up, and talked in this really heavy hillbilly dialect. And I said, "From Big Rock, Arkansas." At one point, Danny Williams wanted to come back on the show, so he came back on as an old-timer named Xavier T. Willard. And he was a good counterbalance to Hog. And Hog and Xavier T. would go on adventures of their own because Forerman Scotty, Steve Powell, would write and floor direct the shows. So he would usher us from scene to scene, would have maybe 2 or 3 scenes set up in the studio, would go from one to the next. There was one scene that we were supposed to be running from the criminals, and there was a little dumpster, and it was, oh golly, about the third of the size of the current dumpsters you have where they put trash. And so Denny and I jumped in the dumpster together. Well, we had just had lunch, and one of us let a little wind go in the dumpster. And so I started laughing, Danny did it, he tried to get up, and I wouldn't let him get out of the dumpster. If I was going to suffer, he was going to suffer. So I kept pulling him back into the dumpster, and he'd try to get out, and then I'd try to get out. And we were making quite a lot of racket inside the dumpster, laughing and so forth, and not going to the next scene. Fan went on, and the smoke came on, and Forerman Scotty opened up the dumpster, says, "You jerks," in pretty strong language. It was stronger than that. "Get out of there and get over to the bunkhouse." So we quit laughing, ran to the bunkhouse, and we were supposed to be eating chocolate-covered ants. And we thought they were chocolate-covered peanuts. So we're laying in the bunkhouse floor, and we started laughing again about what had happened in the dumpster. And we're laughing and trying to carry on a conversation like we're supposed to be doing. And so Steve came across the set and clicked his fingers and said, "Shut up." And so we shut up and finally got the scene out of the way. But things like that would happen all the time, especially when Danny and I were together, because Danny loved to ad-lib and play around. I loved to mess around, so we would probably mess up more scenes than we actually got on tape. But it was a great fun show and a great fun experience. Steve had a Jeep that he fixed up as the Circle 4 Jeep. On the back was a grill, and we would make appearances and we'd grill hot dogs and things like that, hamburger, off the back of the Jeep, and kids would come and get free hot dogs. So we'd make at least 1 or 2 appearances every weekend. Finally, Steve, who flew an airplane, decided we ought to make appearances at theaters around the state. And we had a little routine we worked out. One was the water routine, where you say, "What time is it?" And you pour the water on Steve, and that's funny. And he'd give you another glass of water, and he'd get behind you and say, "Okay, what time is it?" You're supposed to pour it on yourself, you know. Anyway, I don't know how the bit went exactly, but it was something like that. And we had another deal where we had a light bulb, and if you touched the 2 wires together at the bottom of the light bulb would go on. If you release the wires, the light bulb would go off. And Steve would fire a blank. I'd be across the other side of the stage, and Forerman Scotty was going to shoot the light bulb out, and I'd hold the light bulb up, and he would fire a blank, and I'd let go of the thing, and the light bulb would go off. Just silly stuff like that. But the kids liked it, and it was fun. And we would do parades. We were the Grand Marshal of several parades around the state. And the show was, I know, popular for years and years, but my experience on the show was just extra special. I'd go to the store, and people would recognize Hog Waller buying groceries, and you'd have to go into your voice and say, "Yes, me, I'm Hog Waller, all right." And "Yeah, pay for it," you know, and do your thing. And it was probably the most fun I'd had in radio, being on WKY Radio, which was a huge radio station, and then being able to do the TV show on the side. And due to all the exposure and the fact that the kids recognized the character everywhere we went, we took the 10-minute segments, adventure segments that were part of the Forerman Scotty Hour, and tied them together for one big show on Saturday morning. And every Saturday morning they played all the adventure segments tied together for a 1-hour show. Well, on Friday night I usually did a hop somewhere in the state for the radio station, or for myself on behalf of the radio station. And I would try to sleep in late on Saturday. Well, I had 2 young children, and the station had put together these promo pictures that were put on just regular paper, but they had thousands of them. Had Hog Waller written on the side. And I had a bunch at the house. And my kids would get the neighborhood kids to come over to meet Hog Waller. And they would get their friends too. Anyway, on Saturday morning, or during the adventure segment, I'd get out of bed and look outside, and there'd be 50, 60 kids in the front yard, little kids. And they all wanted Hog Waller's autograph. So I'd go out and sign autographs in my front yard until the last kid was gone, because it made my kids look like heroes to their friends and their friends' friends and so forth. But that was just a byproduct of being on television back in those days. The word was out that the Forerman Scotty show was going to be a summer replacement on the weekend for Beanie and Cecil, which was an NBC show. And we were all excited about that. And about that time, ABC, WABC in New York, came to me and wanted me to come to work in New York, and the money was just absolutely huge. So I did. I left WKY, went to New York City, and I missed those days when I got to New York more than anything, and would like to have recreated the TV days again if I could. I did come back to WKY about 2 years later, and didn't get back on television. I had cut some promo spots for KOMA using the Hog Waller voice, and Steve Powell was a little perturbed about that, so he didn't bring me back on television when I came back to WKY, which made the second time around at WKY not quite as much fun as the first time. And so that was the end of that, and I left WKY after that and went to Dallas and became a program director of a radio station there. When I left the television show, Forerman Scotty had me ride out of town on a railroad car, to go do studies on my poor little brain in Washington, D.C. And I always thought that I could come back on the show. When I came back to Oklahoma City, it was not to be, because I recorded in the Hog Waller voice promo spots for WKY's competition, KOMA, to get out of a contract situation that's too long and involved to get into. And so I never was able to get back on television again. And I always look back on those days at WKY and on WKY-TV as among the most happy and joyful days of my entire broadcast career, which lasted for over 40 years.